Okay, so for tonight, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview on how we're using it, satellite imagery in my line of work, which is insurance, crop insurance. Then I'm going to look at give you some examples of some actual risk assessments that we've done in the past, and also how we're using loss assessment, satellite images to do loss assessment, which is a very new and exciting field. So the benefits of using satellite images is basically scale. I mean, it's huge. It can be the whole world, or it can be down to 5 meters or even less, depending on the type of satellite and the data that you have. The frequency as well, we can now get the data within hours of an event happening. And also the data is now available for quite a long time. So we can have real-time monitoring, and all that data is now available, so we've got a good history. There's a lot of different spectral bands depending on which satellites you use, and different bands are much better at picking up different things. Agriculture and plant health is very different bands than, say, buildings and infrastructures, but all of those are available for us to use. It's absence of any physical limits. So for this, it sort of doesn't really matter if you're down a deep gully or you're up the top of a mountain. The satellite doesn't really matter. This is ideal for us in the APAC or the Asia Pacific region. There's a lot of remote areas where loss assessors or risk assessors have to get to. No problem if it's a satellite. And also the other thing is, because it's a science, it might have some inherent bias in the measurement, but it is objective. So while you can argue about the accuracy of it, the objectivity of it is there because it's just an instrument that is taking a measurement, and that a measurement is available for everybody. Just going to do this so I can. Now, so I just want to make sure you can see the PowerPoint. If someone can email me and make sure and let me know that you can see it. Oh yeah, you see you. Okay, hang on. Can you see it now? I think that might help. Sorry about this. I think you should be able to see it now. Just let me know if you can't. Anyway, there's a lot of satellites orbiting the Earth. Right now, there's at least, just have a look, see what everyone's saying. Right now, there's at least 4,600. That's probably gone up since I wrote that, so there's probably more of them. The PowerPoint now is showing the NASA satellites. And so these are all the ones that are owned by NASA, but there is a huge amount of satellites available. Pretty much the European Space Agency has a huge amount. Most countries now will have their own satellites or sort of in the process of getting a satellite. China has a big space program, and they work very closely with a lot of the other countries in the region. Same as Japan, they have some excellent resources, and India. And I've been recently doing a lot of work with Thailand, and they have their own satellites, and they use the resources from around the region. And the other really great thing about all this is that the information is becoming more and more available. So right now, it used to be maybe 15 years ago, it was very hard to get the data, or you had to pay for it, or you had to wait for a year or stuff like that. But nowadays, it's very easily accessible. And there's a lot of free data out there available, which is fantastic. So I want to give a little bit of a plug to the European Space Agency, because they have made a decision, I think it was last year, but they made a decision to just put all of their data now available for free. So I use the Sentinel data a lot, especially the optical one, which is their Sentinel-2. So this one here, this is sort of continues with the spot on the Landsat images, if anyone knows about those, but they're sort of specifically launched for land monitoring purposes, and particularly vegetation health and things like that. So they're every 5 days they orbit the Earth, and they cover the whole country. And normally you can get the data within 24 hours, sometimes quicker. So it's real-time data, it's free, and you can download it from their website. They have a really good, easy-to-use website where you can put in the data that you want. You can even sort of get a preview of the image before you download it. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in this stuff, going on to the European Space Agency and having a look. This is just a bit of an image that we have from them. So this is showing the visible bands, and the really good thing that we use a lot in there is we use the visible bands and the near infrared band, and we use that to calculate the vegetation indexes. So that's the normalized vegetation difference index, or there's quite a few different indexes you can calculate with this. You can also use some of the different bands that will help you correct for that will help you correct for atmospheric conditions, and some of the shortwave infrared can help you correct for cloud cover and things like that as well. So very good source of information. This is just a bit of a picture of the data that you can get from Sentinel-1. This is just, I haven't done anything to this really, pretty much just downloaded it and put it into my GIS. But you can see how good it is. It's excellent resolution. They also have Sentinel-1, which is radar data. Radar data is a little bit harder to use. I think once you're used to it, maybe people wouldn't say that, but it's a little bit more processing required for some of the stuff I do. But again, excellent resolution, 5 meters by 5 meters, the whole globe's covered, and all the data is freely available. Now, the fantastic thing about radar data is that you can use it to look through clouds. It's not affected by clouds. So especially in this region where for quite several months of the year during the monsoon or the rainy season, the cloud completely covers huge amounts of the region. So the optical satellites sometimes can't work very well here, but you can use the radar satellites. And that's very good at detecting surface water. So radar is really, really good for looking for flood damage and things like that. And it's available throughout the season. You can also calculate your vegetation indices. They're a little bit more complicated. It's more things like leaf area index and things like that. But they do, there's been a lot of research on this now, and they do correlate quite well with the vegetation indexes as well. Other data that's available that you can use, and I use quite a lot, is the TRMM, or the trim rainfall data. Again, this is another source of data that's freely available. The spatial resolution it depends on the year that it was taken, but the spatial resolution has been getting better, and it depends on the satellite that it's been using. So what I've got here is a picture of Pakistan during some quite bad flooding up the top of Pakistan that you can see. And what this gives you, it gives you the estimate of the rainfall totals. So you can use that, and then you can sort of give an idea about, how bad that rainfall was compared to previous. And the other data that we use a lot is the MODIS area burnt data, which is, it gives you, it's an excellent resource. It's from the NASA MODIS satellite, and it gives you per month area burnt statistics for every region in the world. This picture here now is showing Australia, down in South Australia in 2009, where they had probably the worst fires in Australia's history. And you can see all the fire spots here. And this is just an idea of the vegetation indexes that you can get. This is the NVDI, and basically this is just showing the seasonal growth. So one is sort of during the wet season after the crops have grown, and the slide on the right is showing the dry season, and you can quickly tell the difference in the NDVI there and the crop growth. Now, another thing that is very good is, because quite often, not always, but quite often for a lot of countries I deal with, we don't necessarily have accurate information about what land cover is on the country. So, for forestry insurance, we sort of need to know where the forests are so that we can map them. And if there's not actual records or government records of this, then often we have to resort to the land cover maps. Again, I've used the European Space Agency or the European Union data for this. I think that's 2000. I think they've now got 2015. So, and it's a very good resource, and they're using it now to look at how the land cover is changing over time. As I said before, the satellite radar images are just perfect or really good for looking at flooding and looking through trying to map flood events. So the image on the left here is the normal flood water. You can get that data from like a non-flood event. Sometimes especially Dartmouth Observatory, will give you a reference image or a non-flood image. Then the one in the middle here is the disaster image. So that's after the flooding has occurred, and you want to try and pick out the areas that are not normally covered with water. So you need to analyze a little bit. What you tend to do is find a band or a color that fits the water, and then use that in your GIS to sort of try and pick out all the other bits of water that are there now that aren't normally there. So we can use this sort of stuff for doing loss assessment, well, for doing risk analysis. So I can give you an idea of some risk analysis we've done using the Dartmouth flood data. This is another excellent resource, the Dartmouth Flood Observatory, and it's now part of the NASA satellite and information, I think, now. But you can pretty much anywhere, any of these grids that you can see on the map, you can click on that and you can get the information from any of that grid. Easy to download, very nice user interface, and it's 10 meters by 10, or 10 degrees by 10 degrees. So you can see, I'm going to have a look here. We were interested in flooding in China, and here you can see they also give you a flood map where they've already done what the current flood water is. The current flood water, it gives you cloud, and it gives you the reference water. So you can do this yourself, or you can actually download this map. And because the coordinates, and you can download this into your GIS as well. So this is some analysis we did for Heilongjiang, which is right at the top of China. They had some very big flooding in July 2013, July and August. And we have a lot of insurance companies who write business up there and for agriculture insurance. And so we had a lot of claims from there. So a lot of our clients wanted to know where we thought the flooding was, where the worst affected was. So again, we identified where that flooding was basically by extracting the normal, the surface water from the normal mean water surface water. So we already had a reference image of where the water normally is, and then we know where it's flooded because that's the extra water that's not normally there. This is just to give you a picture of how widespread the flooding was. These are all farmlands and croplands that were flooded. You can see how deep the water is there. So a lot of those crops were completely destroyed. If they're in water for more than a couple of days, depending on the crop and the time of year, then it's pretty much, they don't recover. And that's another image of the flooding. You can see just how widespread it was. And you can sort of see in here that it was obviously one of the river comes through here, and the banks just overflowed and it just went across the whole plain. Again, just more examples of data that we're using. This gives you an idea. This is from Pakistan, and there was some flooding there due to the monsoon. I mean, obviously during a monsoon there's quite likely to be flooding, but it gets more or less so. This was some quite bad flooding. Oh, this is, sorry, not Pakistan. It was in India. Was that Gujarat, I think, in there? So we were able to get the data and have a look at what the rainfall was for there. So I'm not sure if anyone saw this slide last time I talked, but the basics of risk assessment is hazards times your vulnerability times your elements at risk or your exposure. And while we do have this data for a lot of places in Asia, especially for crop insurance, because a lot of places have not had insurance for a long time, maybe probably 2010 was when it started getting, more widespread. It's very hard to get the vulnerability curves. So we might be able to get an idea of the hazard because climatic data has been around for a long time, and we know what the exposure is because we know now where our clients are and where the insurance policies have been written. But quite often the vulnerability curves are quite hard to calculate. So sometimes instead of doing vulnerability curves, maybe what we do instead is look at events that occurred. So we go back and find actual events that have occurred, and then we can sort of get an idea of how risky something is, what the claims would have been if that had occurred before. So this is again from the Dartmouth Observatory database, and they have a database of every single major flood event back from 1985. And they have a GIS footprint for you, so you can take that, lay it over your insurance portfolio, and you can see what that event, where that event would have affected and how many houses or how many farms would have been affected by that event. It also gives you an idea of the area, how long the event lasted, which is very important for crops. And quite often you can work out a return period based on either Dartmouth will give you an estimate of that, or if you know what the actual rainfall was during that time, you can also work out a return period. So this is another from Dartmouth, another one that they give you, basically the normal flood, and they give you, so here you've got the normal water in the light red, you've got the so I'm just checking that you can see me. You've got the normal water in the darker blue. You've got the light blue, which is the current flooding, and then this grey area here is the maximum flood extent in history. So this gives you an idea. So from this data, I've got normal year, I've got a average flood year or a sort of moderate flood year, and I also know what my PML flood event would be. So there's not a huge amount of data there, but it gives me an idea of a sort of a severe to moderate and also a PML. And sometimes that's all we get. But we can also, what we can do is use data like this and the event database that we have had and that you saw before. And if you've got a flood footprint from your event database, excuse me, you can overlay that on what your current portfolio and work out as if, like, what would have happened if that flood had been. So then you can sort of start building up a database of as if claims, and that can give you an idea of how the risk is, or how you can make things. And you can start slowly to build in your vulnerability curves. Yeah, again, the main issue is that there's a real lack of insurance loss data in Asia, just because the history of insurance isn't there, especially in my area, which is agriculture. And quite often, event scenario losses are the best way to go ahead. You can get PMLs from this, and you can sort of get an idea of what a small, medium, or terrible flood event is, and do some risk weighting based on that. This is again from the Dartmouth. I know I'm showing the Dartmouth a lot, but it's a fantastic resource. And this gives you river watch or river discharge amounts, which helps you, of course, with your flooding. And also it will give you an idea of what a return period is. So if you know what your river discharge level was, you can come and have a look at this and see what the return period was for that. And once you have return periods, then you can sort of start working out probabilities of things occurring. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you some actual risk assessments that we've done for forest fire in China. And I'll also show you some loss assessment stuff later. So forest fire in China, I was involved in building our China crop model. So we have a model which produces loss curves for all the major crops in all regions of China. And we also have forestry, because forestry is a big insurance risk in China, and a lot of the forestry is insured. But there's no claims data, and there's very little data on actual fire occurrences. There's some in the local archives of local governments, but it's quite hard to get. And also not all of the data is not all the fires are included in the data, and it can be quite politically sensitive. So we decided we wouldn't go down that track. We'd find whatever data we could, but we'd actually use satellite data, because that was easily available to us, and it was more objective. So basically the Modus fire data, that has data from 2001 up to present, and it's 500 meter resolution. And what you can get all sorts of data from this, but we use the monthly area burnt data. So basically we just wanted to work out forestry risk. So we had our land use map, and this is just from the land use map, we just identified only forests. So we didn't really, because we were looking at forest risks, so we eliminated any land cover that was not forest, and then we overlaid the area burnt maps onto this. You can see here we also had provincial and county level boundary maps. So now we're getting an idea of, the risk at each county within a province of China. So this is Yunnan province, and you can just sort of look at this, and this is all the fires that were detected during 2001 to 2011. And see, the fire risk is actually a bit lower down the bottom. Obviously, it also depends on the size of the fire and the duration of the fire. These are just fire points, but this gives you a bit of an idea about, where the risk or where the fire risk is within the province. So after a lot of analysis and a lot of running, computers running and GIS data being run, we produced this fire risk region map for China. And you can see this area up here, Heilongjiang and Ilion, Mongolia, they're the biggest fire risks. That makes sense. That's the area that can be quite dry. It has a huge amount of forestry there. They had a huge fire up here called the Black Dragon Fire, I think in 1990 something, where the fire sort of spread across from Russia and it just burned for months and a huge amount of forest was lost. And then you've got here, sort of, this is the medium area that we do, or the high area. This has got a lot of forestry in it, and it also has some susceptibility to drought. This area here, which is quite wet, and it's more crop, there's less. So we use the MODIS area burnt map to be able to produce this risk map. And then we can get like a risk rating for fire, depending on which province you were in. This again, as I said, we can take it down to a county level. So you can see where the risk is within the county. And this is very important for insurance, where if we know where the insured forests are, it makes a big difference whether they're in this sort of this region here versus in that region up here, which is a much higher fire risk. So this is something that we could share with our clients, and when they were doing premium ratings for their fire insurance, they could use this. The other thing we used it for was to work out the fire seasons, or the time of the fire occurrence. A lot of the time, the forest might not be on risk because it's very, there's not many fires during that time. So we can also have an idea of when the fires occur, and maybe have more people on alert for that time, things like that. And we also calculated the national area burnt every year, and we did this by basically summing up the area burnt each month and then dividing that by the forest area. So the forest area burnt divided by the total forest area, and this allowed us to work out an annual loss cost for each province in China. And yes, we had some data from the statistical yearbooks, and we did find there was big differences, but in some ways there was quite similar. Our calculation of the area burnt was higher than the statistical yearbooks, but that's probably because we included all fires, not just big major fires. But in general, the provinces where we thought was higher fires also had higher fires. So there was a lot of similarities, maybe not the actual value of the area burnt, but there was still enough similarities to make us feel happy with the analysis. In the future, what we plan to do is then we can start modelling both the frequency and the severity. So then we're going to get a database of actual fires. This is just a picture of a fire point that we got from MODIS. And this is the footprint. So this is the area that it burnt. So this is the footprint. We can calculate in here how much forest was burnt. And for that, we can start building up a nice database of severity and frequency, which is a much better way of analysing the risk. Okay, so now I'll show you some stuff we did on the Thai flooding in 2011. Which was some of the worst floods in Thailand's history. Again, the losses assessment was going to be quite hard. This is a picture of some of the flooding up in the northeast province up there. I mean, it was very widespread. It was basically, they had a whole lot of tropical cyclones around there at the same time, and there was more tropical cyclones than normal that affected Thailand, or the remnants of those storms. So there was a lot of rain around, and then the monsoon came in, and it was pretty heavy monsoon as well, but the ground was already saturated by then, so it was a bad flood year. There was also issues with the government flood waters and how that was controlled and stuff like that. But a lot of the crop, especially the rice crop, was affected by the flooding. So we have clients that insure the rice crop, the national rice crop, in Thailand, so we wanted to help them give an idea of what losses they were expecting. So we managed to download an image of the flooding. We had to take satellite images over consecutive days because there was a lot of cloud cover over there as well, and also you know, the flooding changed on the ground because they were, depending on when you took the measurement, it was still flooding. But this was our maximum extent of the Thai flood. And this is a picture we made, but we also now have the Thai government now provides a map, and it's very similar to this. So you can see this was there was a lot of flooding down here, but actually this was the area up here that most of our clients got hit because these are the big rice growing areas. So what we did here was we overlaid our insurance portfolio on top of here. So these figures are the insured value for each of those provinces, sorry. And we've got the flooded areas and we've got our insurance portfolio. So that's on a provincial basis, but we also could do it on a district basis. So these are all the districts that had some flooding. And these are all these are the insured districts. These are all the districts that had some flooding. And the red is the waters. And then the districts in red here are insured districts that got flooded. And the green districts were insured districts but not flooded. So this could give us an idea of how it was going to affect the national rice scheme, which was fully insured. Well, it was insured by our clients and it was also reinsured in the international markets. And what we did is we basically said, what's the sum insured in each province, what proportion of the districts, or what was the value of the districts that had some flooding, and that gave us an idea of the proportion of each province that was flooded and how bad that flooding was there. You can see here, these are the worst ones. And Ayunthia down here, that was flooded 100% of the districts. The insured districts down there were flooded. The farmers were pretty savvy, I think, in this thing because they were able to buy insurance during the season. So I think, you know, a lot of them did have some idea that it was going to be a bad flood year, and there was a lot of insurance that year. I think never underestimate how smart farmers are. So that was, we finally, the main thing is during this, it probably took about 3 to 4 months for the claims assessment to be done and for claims to start being paid out. But our clients needed to have an idea about how much they were going to pay so they could have claims loss reserves. So they reserve a certain amount of money to pay claims that they know that they're going to pay in the future. Our estimate was about 30 million USD. And I think in the end, the claims came out to be about 25 million USD. So it was we managed to do this in a week, and we could get our clients having our loss reserves within, you know, two weeks of the event. Whereas the actual claims, it took months and months for those claims to be paid out. So for loss reserving and to give an idea of what the event was going to produce, this was a good exercise. Okay, and then recently we've been working with the Thai government as well to look at using vegetation health indexes and satellite data to do loss assessment. And I think this is going to be something that's going to happen more and more. Loss assessment is actually quite a tricky thing to do. It takes a lot of expertise, lots of training. It's quite hard and it can be quite expensive. And especially when especially in India and Thailand and some of the places, the farms are very small. So by the time you pay a qualified loss assessment to go all the way out to some remote area, do the loss assessment and do that can cost almost as much as the claim. So if we can do a remote loss assessment, it will really reduce the costs. And also if I think there's, you know, eventually there'll be a very nice objective measurement of loss assessments that can be done in a very timely manner and it won't cost as much. So it's a win-win for everything. Unfortunately, I don't think the ground truthing is good enough yet, but it's progressing very quickly, and I don't think it's going to be long before a lot of loss assessment is done this way. Already we're using this as a way to verify claims and just to double check on claims and to, give us an idea of losses. And it's working out very well. So this is basically what I just said. So basically it's very useful in this area, and it can be very quick, objective and quick to do. So basically another really good thing about satellite-based loss assessment is that you can see how the crop is growing over time. So a lot of times in insurance, no one really goes out and sees the crop until there's a claim, and then the farmer puts in a claim, someone goes out and assesses the crop. But we've got no idea how that crop was growing before the claim. There's various ways we get around that. We go and have a look at what the neighbour's crop was like. We try and find an undamaged field in the same farm and see what the crop was like in there. So, because we've got to make sure the damage was due to the event, not just the damage due to bad farming practices or lack of nitrogen or things like that. So with the satellite, you can at any stage you can go back and look, and so you can see how the crop was doing before and after the event, which is really good. And it's not possible to do with traditional loss assessment. So this is sort of a new thing that satellite can offer us. So generally, measurements of crop health is generally used with the optical satellites, but we can use radar, but I'll just talk about the optical stuff. So basically, healthy vegetation reflects light and differently than damaged vegetation. So healthy vegetation generally is low reflections in the blue and the red spectrum, but higher in the green and the near infrared. And then if your vegetation is damaged, that affects the chlorophyll content of the leaves, and that reduces the amount of reflectance in the green region. So basically what you're looking at is the different amounts of reflection in healthy versus damaged or stressed vegetation. So we know what it should be with a healthy plant, and if the levels of reflections are lower, that's an indication that the plant is stressed. Another good thing is that some of this stuff is quite hard to see but with the human eye, because it's actually something within the chlorophyll content of the leaf, which is not necessarily easy to see. So again, the satellites can sort of measure things that the humans can't see, which is useful. This just gives you an idea of the normalized difference vegetation index, which has been widely used for a long time and widely used at the moment for measuring vegetation health. And again, it's just a ratio of reflectance in the near infrared and the infrared and the visible, and you can sort of see in that picture there. You can values of 0.72 or sort of about above 0.5-ish usually is healthy vegetation, and lower vegetation levels have lower on the index. It's a normalized index, which is excellent because that gives an idea of how it is compared to normal. However, it can be affected by the atmosphere, and things like snow or ice sometimes come out with very interesting NDVI equations, and you might misinterpret that for crops rather than snow or ice. Same thing for bare soil. So again, you've got to make sure that, it's very important to have maps of where the crops are actually growing, and then you're only taking your measurements of where the crops are grown, not on just anything, not on your total satellite image. So here you can see what happens, the difference. So the green line here is a nice healthy corn crop, and this got affected by hail, and you can see that damaged it, and the red line shows lower reflectance. And this is basically our measure, the measure of reflectance. And there are different spectrums where you can see the differences. So here you can sort of see in this area here, there's not a huge amount of difference, but the big differences here are in these bigger wavelengths, in the 700 to 800, which is the near infrared. And that's where you can really see the differences. One very important thing that you need to be aware of when you're doing loss assessment is the growth stage of the crop. So what happens is with the NVDI, that changes over the growing season. So when you first plant the crop, it's quite low. The maximum NVDI you'll get is 0.1. And then as soon as it starts growing and producing seeds and heading, that's when you get your maximum amount of NDVI, up to 0.9. But then again, as it stops growing and it's sort of ripening in the field and ready to harvest, this goes down again. So if you've got an NDVI of say 0.40 and you think, oh, that might be damaged, if it's in here, sorry, you know, if it's in this 30-day, if it's been growing for a while and it's in its tillering and heading stage, then yes, it is probably damaged. But if it's sort of right before harvest or it's just after seeding, then maybe it's not damaged. So it's very important to know at what stage of growth it is when you're doing the loss assessment. This gives you an idea of how plants can recover. So again, luckily we can see this with satellite images. You can keep taking NDVI measurements throughout the season. But this was some maize at the 4th growth stage, and it got some quite bad hail damage. It looks pretty bad. If you're a loss assessor, you would have gone up there and said, oh yeah, that looks pretty bad. But we went back there like about a month and a half later or 2 months later, and you can see all the crops have recovered. So the recovery of the crop is very important, the stage of the growth when the damage occurred, because a lot of crops can recover quite well. And again, it's quite important for agriculture insurance because that is based on yield losses. So this farmer wouldn't have had a payment, but if we didn't realise about the recovery and stuff like that, the claim situation might have been very different. So I think, you know, in future, we're going to probably start using these vegetation indexes as loss assessment tools. There's a lot of advantages for it, but there still needs to be a lot of ground truthing and ground testing. There's a very good organisation called RICE, R-I-I-C-E, and they're currently doing a lot of this ground testing, but they've been doing it for, you know, maybe almost 10 years now. And they're sort of now becoming very confident with the results, but it does take a long time to do this. There's also issues with a lot of insurance companies, policies have deductibles. So, you know, if your rice has to have more than 20% yield loss before you'll get a claim. If you have a yield loss of less than 10%, say that there's no claim, and then that's a deductible. And then, but that's quite a hard thing to say. How do you know what a 10% yield loss looks like in terms of a reduction in the vegetation index? So things like that have to be calibrated as well. There's still quite a lot of work to do, I think. Again, the issues with the cloud cover, as I said, you basically, if there's cloud, you can't see it, and there's no information from that pixel. Again, very hard because a lot of the losses, especially flood losses, are going to occur during the monsoon season. You can get around that by using your radar, but there's also a few things you can do, and ESA, or the European Space Agency, they have some very nice free GIS tools that allow you to control for it. And also you can use some of the different information, some of the different bands that you might not use in your vegetation index, you can use them to deal with your cloud cover. So this is just a picture of a before and after of the cloud after I've corrected for atmospheric conditions and cloud cover. And another thing you can do, even though NDVI is probably the most well-known and one of the most used, now, you know, there's a lot other ones that come out. So now we tend to use the EVI, which is very similar to NVI, but it's been corrected a little bit. You can see, if you can see that equation down there, you can see that you've added some of the blue light and stuff like that, and some other bands, and that just allows you to correct for some of the atmospheric conditions. So there's ways of getting around all the issues. All right, and that's me. So I will try and answer some of your questions if I can find them. So yeah, if there are any questions, hopefully you can still hear me. I've got a few minutes now, I can answer any of those. Might even find my camera so you can see me, but yeah, don't count on it. So I haven't had too many questions, I've just got two here. I'm not really, oh, there's some more here. I'm not really sure about the first question about the planet's constellation. I know you can, depending on the satellite, you can get really down very low. But generally, the better the resolution, the more expensive the data is. Someone just asked if they can do crop yield with satellite imagery. Again, I think that's a very nice thing, and I'm hoping we can do that. But at the moment, I think it still needs a lot of work, a lot of ground truthing. But there's a lot of very smart people involved in that at the moment. And I'm sure, you know, in the next 10 years or something, we're going to be able to do that. Yeah, I'm probably going to not share my presentation with you, unfortunately, just because it's my company owns it. Yeah, someone asked again about SAR, which is the radar images, and you can do, I'm pretty sure what you do now is, I think you use the leaf area index. There's a very good paper, you can probably find it on the internet, which looks at all of the different indices, and it looks at the radar ones and how they correlate well with the crop health as well. And it's easily done. It's just a little bit more processing, a little bit harder. Someone's asked me how much I use GIS. I use it quite a lot. I really enjoy using this sort of stuff. And I probably, I probably use it every week at least. And then when we're doing some of this analysis, we'd be using it weeks on end. There's lots of GIS programs available to you. We use ArcGIS at the moment. But I know, like for some of that stuff I did on the fire mapping and the fire risk mapping, I used ILWIS, which is a very nice open source free software. I'd also really recommend QGIS as well. That's sort of free and easily available software. There's another question here about yield and estimates. Yeah, I think we're getting to the point where we can do yield indexes. And it's just a matter of it's just the ground truthing and stuff like that, but it's not going to take long before we'll be able to do that. I didn't have a recent example from 2016. I think some of the NDVI ones I used were from 2016 for the Thailand stuff. We're doing a lot of work with the Thai government there, trying to see if that's going to be useful. So I think a lot of the images from Thailand were from the 2011, because that's when the big flooding occurred, but we also had some data there from last year as well, and we were looking to see if we could actually use the satellite data for loss assessment. And in Thailand, what they do is if there's a certain amount of flooding in a village, then the whole village is, everyone in that village gets a claim. So we've been trying to see if we can identify the villages that would have a claim, and we've been doing that this year. We do create risk zones for agriculture insurance. Generally, we do that when there's not much claims data and we don't really have a history of claims. I mean, the best thing to do is actually have a history of losses so you can work out an expected annual loss and then give yourself a premium rate. But quite often that data might not be available down to that level. So for instance, some stuff we're doing at the moment for my country in New Zealand, which you think we'd have lots of data for, but not necessarily. We might work out what the expected annual loss of a flood is in, say, a city, and then within that city we would have different risk zones depending on the elevation, the flood mapping, and so everyone would start with sort of the same expected annual loss, and depending on where the risk zone, then that would go up or down. So yes, we do use risk zones. We use them for premium rating as well. Yeah, again, individual growers, that's it depends on the resolution of your data, and it's hard. I mean, you can get drone images and things like that, and you can actually fly over a field and do that, but sometimes it's quite hard to tell. So like forestry in particular, they use a lot of drone imagery and radar or data, and they can actually pretty much now measure the tree, and they can measure the growth on the tree, and so they can measure the volume of the wood available. But it's a bit harder for things like, say, wheat, where the quality of the grain is as important factor as the volume of the grain as well. So not so good for working out quality as growth. And again, it's the resolution of the data that you have. Oh, you might be able to see me now. All right, if there's no more questions, then we might leave it there. Thank you very much for attending. Feel free to email me if you have any more questions, and I'm happy to share, answer your questions via email. And I'm happy to share some of the resources that we used, or some of the studies that we used to do some of the analysis.